First of all, I would like to ask people if they could be so kind and get hold of a Tanakh, if possible, and of a Machzor, if possible. If not, we've got a link to the Machzor in the Sefaria. But you might want to use the Machzor that you know that, or that you intend to use on Rosh Hashanah. That might be better. The main work we will be doing will not be in the Machzor, but I would nevertheless like to be able to refer to it. And you definitely need a Chumash or a Tanakh. I prefer for everybody to have theirs because there's some verses that are very hard to translate. And I'm grateful if a few different people have different Tanakhs, we can get the wisdom of a number of attempts at translation. So if you could have a Chumash or a Tanakh either, and a Machzor if possible. I'll get started. So welcome back to those people who were here last week, and welcome to those who weren't. I want to refer to one or two small things from last week and then move along to what we were doing, intending for this week. We ended last week with a very provocative piece by Ezekiel, where he argues that good people can undo the good of their life and end up in trouble, and bad people can undo the evil of their lives and reconstruct. And people were provoked by this, and that's what Ezekiel meant to do. And we will return to it, but that will be next week. So for those who felt at the end of last week, wait a minute, this can't be, that's exactly what Ezekiel wanted to provoke in you, and that's fine. And he says so in so many words, and we'll come back to that. I also got a little email from one of the participants about this circle that I mentioned, that Rav Soloveitchik mentioned that the word teshuvah is about a circular movement in Tanakh. In other words, it's not you run away from God and you come back in a linear way, but that you make a circle, and that the circle can be enlarged. In other words, if you go wrong, it's not that you go far away, it's that you just start a circle that's a bit larger and you can get back to God. Just 1 second. Sorry, I've got people at the door asking for tzedakah, but there is an idea. If you're in the middle of doing a mitzvah, you can't do the other mitzvah. This, I'm afraid, is one of those cases they'll have to come back. I apologize for the disturbance, but I didn't know if it was some emergency. But I think it can wait. So, sorry, it was a little bit disturbing. So she was asking, don't we improve? Isn't that we slowly improve? And there are people who talk about this, that it's a little bit, it's not exactly, we don't make circles, we move upward in the process. But that wasn't what Rav Soloveitchik was talking about, was the possibility of a closeness with God, and the sense that if somebody goes and does something unjust, they remove themselves a little bit from that closeness, but it's a beginning of a circle and they can find their way back. And that's what he was talking about. He also talked about whatever spot you find yourself in can awaken you the wish to be closer. So yes, there can be that movement that keeps on going, that goes round and round. Yes, there's a circular movement, but the idea of a circular movement rather than a linear movement is, I think, what Rav Soloveitchik was getting after. And it's a very important concept because in other words, the beginnings of how to return are already in that beginning of walking away. If you think about staying in one spot and then moving in a direct line, a straight line, what we call a straight line away, the help towards coming back is not found in the walking away. You're going to have to turn around to get back. But if you think of a circle, as you move out in a circle, the beginnings of the coming back are somehow already in that movement. And that's what he was getting after, that even in a movement that one feels is a mistake, there's the beginnings of possibilities of moving back. An idea which I think is just, it's both rooted in the text and brilliant. But Rav Soloveitchik, that was his greatness, I think, in finding within the older texts ideas that psychologically we could work with. Now, I want to go on to the question of the timing of Rosh Hashanah and the first mitzvah that we ever received. And Rosh Hashanah, the character of Rosh Hashanah is not so clear. In fact, I'd be grateful, Shira, if you could put up the source sheet, the first source sheet right away, even though I wasn't going to do that, the first page of the source sheets right away.
Oh, sorry.
No? Have you got it? If you've got it. The first source sheet, the beginning of it. Okay. What is the character of Rosh Hashanah? We said last week it's called Yom Teruah, the day of Teruah, the day of sounding the horn, or the day of remembrance with the sounding. And the question is, what is its character? And the question that I want to raise here in terms of time is, why does it come before Yom Kippur? As against first Yom Kippur and then Rosh Hashanah. All right, here's a piece about, and I just do the English. Usually in the world, the second line of the English, a person who knows that he will stand trial, dresses in black, wears black, lets his beard grow, since he doesn't know how his trial will end. But Israel is not so. They wear white, they put on white, they dress in white, they cut their beards, they eat and drink, and they're happy on Rosh Hashanah. They know that the Holy One who pays for him will perform wonders for them. Okay, that's all, Shir. So what is it saying? We have a contradiction in the way we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. On the one hand, we go to shul, we listen to the shofar, we read Machiot, Zichronot, and Shofarot, which are texts which talk about the awesomeness of God, his judgment. And yet, we go home and we eat a nice meal, an apple and honey, and all the other. Is anybody Sephardi here? Sephardim have masses of different symbols, a lot of them very sweet. There's a contradiction within in terms of how we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. We seem to have a day which is both the day of judgment and a day in which it's a holiday. Has anybody found this an issue in their celebration of Rosh Hashanah? Has anybody ever felt this before? The way one goes to shul and yet comes home and the contrast. Has anybody felt that contrast? You can say yes.
Growing up,
Yeah.
I always felt that Rosh Hashanah was like this very, very serious thing, and now some of that had to do with things like being bothered by the air conditioning and things like that. But other than that, also. And then my freshman year in college, I decided to stay in school and daven there. And it felt more like a chag.
Yes,
And then the following year, I came back home because I wasn't sure that was like the right thing.
Right, excellent. So we have this problem that there's a contrast within Rosh Hashanah. And what this piece that I'm showing you, which we'll come back to, is from the Talmud Yerushalmi. It's the version of the Talmud that developed in Israel as against the Talmud we usually study, which developed in Babylonia. And in that, they say this is very odd. And one of the things that's odd is that we say it's the day of judgment, and yes, we're quite happy to sit and eat because we have a sort of confidence that God it's going to be okay. It's a day of judgment, but it's also a day when we feel it's going to be okay. So there's this contrast within Rosh Hashanah. There's another contrast as well. If you think of the prayers of Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, and we've got a link there to Malchiot and Zichronot and Shofarot in Sefaria, which explains them and brings them. If you think of the special prayers of Rosh Hashanah, the first piece, which is all about God being king, with 10 verses about God's reigning in the world, and the second one about God's remembrance. Oh gosh. I apologize. Coming from every direction. Well, I apologize. I'm sorry, I turned off one phone and I thought I turned off both. If you think about Malchiot, which is celebrating God's reigning over the world, and you think about Zichronot, which talks about God's knowledge of everything and God's remembrance. Today we'll say God's remembrance. Next week we're going to take away the aspect, we're going to remove completely the aspect of time. But for today we're going to leave the word Zikaron the way we usually word the Zikaron, meaning to remember. Next week, we're going to destroy that completely, hopefully. If you still manage to hold on with me despite my all the disturbances here. So that's Rosh Hashanah is Malchiot. It's God's kingship. It's Zichronot. He's remembering everything that happened in all times of history. It's Shofarot. It's blowing the shofar. If you think of the time scale of those prayers, Zichronot starts from the first thing we talk about God remembering, to people, the first people that we talk about God remembering and saving, who were Noah in the ark. Very unusual prayer. We start historically from Noah and we end with one day they'll bring the Messiah. And Ma'achiot, the prayer about God's reigning, also ends with the Messiah. And Shofarot starts from Matan Torah, from getting the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and ends with the days of the Messiah. In other words, these are prayers very rooted in history and very rooted in the history of mankind and or womankind or humankind and the Jewish people, right? Both. And there's an intermingling between our history and the history of the world, what we hope will happen to all human beings. So there's the individual is subsumed within all this big story of God as reigning, of us acknowledging God's reign, of God's awareness of each human being. But nevertheless, we're all part of this big story, which takes the whole universe in all directions and takes the whole of what we call human history. So within that, we're subsumed. We don't tell our personal story on Rosh Hashanah. And then we come to Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, and we start talking about all the particulars. I did this and I did that, and God forgive me of this, and I tried to remember that. Why isn't it in the opposite order? Why don't we start with Yom Kippur, which is all about what did I do this year? Where did I get it right? I don't think we focus enough on where did I get it right, which we also have to do, because you won't grow the good unless you focus on what it was. If you don't notice it, there's a beautiful Hasidic idea. If you sit there and only play in the mud, you won't be stringing pearls. So you need to notice what went wrong and analyze it. And that's what the vidui does. It actually looks at not just things you did, but what were the psychological processes. And that's very needed. It's also very needed to look at what went right and why it went right and how that could be made to grow. But all that's happening on Yom Kippur. Why? And then, why is that happening on Yom Kippur instead of happening first? And then Rosh Hashanah is the day when I say, all right, I sorted myself out and now I'm part of humanity and I feel I can let go, and I can let go of my personal history, and I can pray for all of humanity and for all of history, and for the temple to be rebuilt and all those kind of larger issues. Now I'm simplifying because there's aspects of both on both days, but as a whole, Rosh Hashanah is about the world, about Jewish history, world history, human history, and Yom Kippur is about the individual and one's own very, very sitting there with a lot of nitty gritty. I did this, I did that. Why did I do that? We would have thought that you would first go through the process of Yom Kippur. Yes, Evie. Evie, did you want to say something? You got to unmute yourself, Evie, if you want to say something. Maybe not. Okay. Why do you get this order like this? Does anybody want to suggest something?
Yeah.
Okay, Debbie.
I'd like to suggest that first you need to orient yourself. You have to get the big picture. You have to see what the priorities are, and then see how you fit into that picture.
Okay, very good. Another suggestion? I think that's very good. It certainly must be part of the story. I think another suggestion that I've heard from my late husband is that Rosh Hashanah is more of an acknowledgement, although God is king and he's judge, he's also accessible. I can come before him, I can acknowledge him. And it's after I have that sense that I can stand before God, that as part of all of us, through the big picture, however it is, then God will help me to do tshuva. I think a lot of people feel it's not so easy to do tshuva. It's not so easy to be optimistic about one's own personal nature, Jewish or other, about human nature. It's not so easy. We look at it, especially if we're not 20, and we say, well, I tried last year and I tried 10 years ago, and how much did I really achieve? How much can I do? And somebody who's really depressed, or somebody who's gone through something where they really feel they've done something very wrong, they need to feel, I'm standing here with God and God wants me, in order to be able to feel I can go through the process. So that's also a suggestion about why the process of Rosh Hashanah with this big picture comes first before the personal process. Yes, Shira.
Maybe we gain chizuk from being part of the collective, like we on Har Sinai, we accept these commandments as a group, and we're always vacillating between the individual and the collective in so many ways. And so on Rosh Hashanah, by focusing on the group, focusing on the collective, we're gaining the strength, and we're realizing like everybody's going to have to go through this, and it gives us like some chizuk to go into Yom Kippur and then say, I can do this for myself, because everybody else is going to be doing it for themselves too.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because I think one aspect of Yom Kippur is that we ask forgiveness in the plural, even if we're talking about something personal. We're still asking that others be forgiven for the same kind of act. And it's true that really when one notices problems in oneself, one stops projecting, and one has maybe space and generosity for somebody else who's done something problematic. When one acknowledges in oneself, then one has space to say, God, help that other person with that problem. So it could be that first process of seeing oneself as part of a larger group is necessary in order to be able to really ask for change for oneself and for others as well, rather than just in a very private way. Yes, Chaim.
Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. Yom Kippur represents the second chance that God's love to us gives us. So they have to be second. And Yom Kippur is really the day that Moshe Rabbeinu came with the second chance luchot to humankind. So cannot be Yom Kippur before Rosh Hashanah. It can be only after the beginning of the year, when we have the second chance, then we have the capacity to go to the Kadosh Baruch Hu and to forgive other people too.
That's very interesting. In other words, the Day of Atonement isn't in preparation for being judged. The Day of Atonement is after judgment. It's a second chance. It's an addition. It's once you've already, it's not first you try to get atonement and then you get judged, but it's that second chance. That's very nice. You've heard in the way Rosh Hashanah is felt is a reflection of the real. From Zmira Khan, maybe you'd like to tell us what because I can't see the rest of it. Let's see in the chat, what is it she's saying?
I can read it.
Paradox is a reality of life, and the good and not so good intertwined. Okay, exposure to the experience of the Jewish and humankind through time. Okay, because that seems to me to be intrinsic to Judaism. Okay, excellent, lovely, yes, a sort of reflection of both aspects. Now, how do I get out of the chat? For some reason, it's not showing me how to do that. That's a problem.
Upper right-hand corner.
No, it's okay, I got out. Okay, so it's I'll go with that as well. That the Rosh Hashanah, that mixed way of celebrating it is an aspect of the way we experience the world, with all its positives and negatives. Now, having looked at that for a little bit, and we are going to come back to the Machzor next week and see see time very differently. For now, we're saying there's Machio, there's celebrating God's being our king. There's Zichronot, which is about remembering, us remembering, God remembering. And there's Shofarot, which is about blowing before God or blowing towards ourselves. And we saw that Rosh Hashanah is as if it's in the Holy of Holies, Pnim, as if it's inward, but it's also as if it's inward in ourselves. That it is that the shofar is a chance to reach into something very inward.
Shofar, Gilla, shofar
Yes.
also was blown before war. Maybe we're going into a battle with ourselves, for
Very good. Yes, yes, very, very much so. In other words, shofar has such different aspects to it, whether it's more, is it something about war? Is it something about crying? Is it something about calling? Is it about something about anoint, like something you do, you trumpet before the king? It has the different aspects. And we actually echo that with the different sounds. We have 3 different sounds. We have Tekiah, Tu'ah, and Shvarim, which do relate to different aspects of the sound of the shofar. So we have all those aspects sort of held in together somehow within Rosh Hashanah. Now, my second question about the timing of Rosh Hashanah is how we get to Rosh Hashanah, to have Rosh Hashanah at the time that we do. Now, here I want to relate to the first mitzvah that we were given according to the rabbis. And here you need your Chumash or Tanakh. And I'm grateful for everybody who opens one, because I want lots of different translations of the verse. I want to be in Exodus chapter 12, verse 12. No, verse 2, sorry. Right at the beginning of Exodus chapter 12. If you look at the first Rashi on the whole of the Torah on Breshit, he says, here's the first mitzvah given to the whole Jewish people. So we have Abraham who gets circumcision, but here's the first mitzvah given to all of the Jewish people. Chapter 12, God says to Moses and Aaron in chapter 12, verse 2, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. Rishon hu lachem l'chol chodshei Hashanah. And after that, we'll get to the translation in a moment. It says, speak to the Jewish people and tell them on the 10th of the month to bring a paschal lamb. And the question is, what is the meaning of verse 2? HaChodesh hazeh lachem. It doesn't say he should tell it to the Jewish people. He says it to them. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. I suppose most English translations will say, this month is for you the head of the months. Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei Hashanah. It is first for you among the months of the year. Okay, they're coming out of Egypt. This is going to be for them the beginning of time. It's true. We said that maybe Rosh Hashanah talks about the beginning of time in terms of creation and creation of the human being, but here's for them the beginning of time. Sforna says they don't have time before that. A slave doesn't have time. He is not the master of time or mistress of their time. If you are not at all the master, the mistress of one's time, how can you make choices? It's very, very difficult. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. It's the name. Now, however, the way I translated it to you, it says the same thing twice. This month is for you the head of the months. It's first for you among the months of the year. Now, for those of us who are have learned some Mishnah or Gemara or Shulchan Aruch, we know that the rabbis don't like, or Rashi or Midrashim, the rabbis don't assume that the Torah says the same thing twice. They assume that there is some nuance, there's some difference, because otherwise the Torah didn't have to say it twice. And they understand that the first half of the verse, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim, doesn't mean this is the first month. That's the second half of the verse. What does the first half of the verse say? And you might have an English translation that's already been influenced by the rabbinic understanding. This chidush, this newness is for you the beginning of the month, i.e., this is how you know it's the beginning of the month. Look at the moon and start the month off. Okay? HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This newness of the moon is for you the beginning of the month. Also, this is the first month of the year. Okay? But the first half of the verse means this is how you start a month. Look at the moon and see how it looks. Anybody want to volunteer what their translation is there?
Yeah, I have the New Koran one, and
Yeah.
it says, "This month shall be to you the beginning of months. The opening of the year, this month will be for you."
Right. So that is a translation which says, I'm going to literally translate it. And the difficulty of that translation to the rabbis is, why would the verse say exactly the same thing twice? Ken, have you got something different there?
I have the Fox translation. Let this new moon be for you the beginning of new moons. The beginning one, let it be for you of the new moons of the year.
Okay, that one gets closer to the rabbinic idea because it says, it calls it a chodesh. It doesn't say chodesh a month, but chodesh meaning a new moon. This will be the beginning of new moons. Okay, so and the word chodesh comes from the word chadash. The word for month comes from the word for new. The new moon is what creates the new month in this understanding. Now,
if I was back translating that
yes,
beginning, I would use the word tehillah, not Rosh.
okay,
I have,
okay,
Why?
I have JPS, and I have, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be
Okay.
the first of the months of the year for you.
okay. So that one sticks with more literal. Now the rabbis understood, no, it's not just this is going to be the first month, but this is how you tell a month. This new moon will be the beginning of the month, right? This chadash, hachodesh, this chidush, this newness. What newness? The new moon. And not only do they say that, they say this isn't just descriptive. This is a command, right?
Rabbi, I have a translation that says this is
Yes.
the month.
What?
This, using the word Rosh, it's translated as this is the head month.
The head month. But the rabbis want to say this is the head of the month. This is how you know the beginning of the month. Again, you could say, as the Sforna says, this is the first of your months because this is the beginning of time for you. Now time is your own. This is, in other words, it's an introduction to all the mitzvot. It's an introduction to your new existence.
It's
But
also in Hebrew, you have your Yoshev Rosh as a chairman, is the head person of a committee.
yes, very nice.
And you don't, it's a like top person, top everything. So this is the month that heads the year.
Excellent, excellent. And so what the rabbis understood, though, is this is not just descriptive, it's proscriptive. You have to do something, not just, oh, now this is the beginning of time, this is your first month. I mean, some commentators understand it's descriptive and then prescriptive. Since this is the beginning, your first month, make it the first month, start the months from here. But the rabbis understand it's actually a mitzvah here. It's a mitzvah to deal with time. And it's not only a mitzvah to deal with time and to make time meaningful, it's a mitzvah to make time holy. Now, when you take the Shabbat, that's not up to us. The Shabbat comes every 7 days. And if somebody finds, there's a wonderful chapter 7, of course, it's chapter 7 of the Masechet of Shabbat, which starts talking about, what if somebody finds himself in a desert? He doesn't know when Shabbat is. What happens to Shabbat? Yes, but because Shabbat is a particular day. So does he count 6 days and then make a Shabbat? But when he comes back home, if there's still a Beit HaMikdash, if he got Shabbat on the wrong day, he'll have to bring a sacrifice because he got the wrong day. In other words, Shabbat doesn't move around. But the holidays are a different story. In Masechet Rosh Hashanah, which is a lot about time, they start talking about, wait a minute, the holidays, they're dependent on seeing the new moon and deciding that it's Rosh Chodesh. Now, nowadays we have a calendar, but in those times they didn't use a calendar, even once they had a calendar, which is they went and waited for people to come and say, we saw the new moon. And then they would say, Mekudash, it's holy, and start the month. And so what happened if it was a very cloudy day? Maybe they didn't get a report of the new moon, but the new moon was really there. What happened if the people just didn't make it to get there in time? You could have a situation where it should have been Rosh Chodesh according to nature, and it didn't manage to be Rosh Chodesh. Now, this is a massive issue, because if you didn't make it Rosh Chodesh on the right day, then what? Then Yom Kippur's on the wrong day, and Pesach's on the wrong day, but it isn't the wrong day, because it's HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This is for you. It doesn't say HaChodesh Hazeh Rosh Chodeshim. This is the way it is, and then it will be Rosh Chodesh. It says HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem is for you to create the head of the month. And of course, the biggest problem is going to be on Rosh Hashanah, because on Rosh Hashanah, what are we going to do? Which day is it? Let's say on the 20, when do you see the new moon? You see it late in the afternoon or early evening. That's when you see the moon rising at the beginning of the month. So along come witnesses and say, we saw the new moon. If they manage to do that on the 29th, and before nightfall, the rabbis managed to say, okay, this is it. This is the new month. Then no problem. Rosh Hashanah.
Am I the only one that froze?
Oh, she's frozen.
Oh, okay.
It's not us.
Yeah, it looks
Shira?
like it's her internet. I mean, it lost her Zoom connection.
I'm afraid internet in Israel can leave a lot to be desired.
I'm going to suggest that she just sign back in. So
She might not realize that she's frozen.
yep, I'm going to try.
Wait a minute.
Does anyone have the altar translation? It would be interesting to see what the altar does with Exodus
Yes,
12:2.
yes. I've got the altar translation, and it says very much the same as the JPS. In fact, I thought it might say something exciting and different, but it doesn't. It says, sorry, I'm going backwards through it because I can't quite get used to it starting the wrong end. Exodus 12.
Sarah, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. I'm just going to apologize. I don't know about anybody else, but I lost the Zoom for a couple of minutes. Did anybody else lose it, or everybody else was
No,
together?
it was you. Your Zoom crashed on you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all right now.
Somebody just asked, what is the altar translation? So I'm going to read that out, but it's very similar to all the others. This month is for you, head of months. It is the first for you of the months of the year. So that's just, it doesn't have this.
Okay, now all those translations have to suggest what is the difference between the first half and the second half of the verse. And for that, I like the Sephona's interpretation best, which is, since this is the beginning of time for you, since this is your first month after slavery, make this the first month. Start the year off. Since this is the first month, if you're having freedom, if you're having some sort of mastery over time, make it your first month. The rabbis went in a different direction and said, the first half of the verse is HaChodesh HaChidush Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This is the way you can tell that it's the beginning of the month. Not only the first of the months, but the beginning of the month. And then what we ended up with was the fact that it's a mitzvah. And not only it's a mitzvah, the first mitzvah of the Torah is to decide when the holidays happen, which is beyond belief. In other words, you're going to have holy time, but when is it going to be? Actually, it's going to be when you manage to make it. It's going to depend on nature, on the new moon, but if you don't manage to, in time, in the afternoon before it gets dark, call it, then the next day will also be Rosh Hashanah, and it will be a month with an extra day, and Yom Kippur and Pesach will be a day later, right? In other words, there's an subjectivity about it. Now, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, it's even more so. The whole day of Rosh Hashanah, we're keeping Rosh Hashanah, but we don't know yet if it will be the only day of Rosh Hashanah, because maybe we'll have a second day of Rosh Hashanah if nobody comes to testify in time, which will mean that's why we have Rosh Hashanah 2 days, even in Israel, because everybody was stuck with starting off Rosh Hashanah and waiting to see, even though traditionally almost never did it happen. And Rosh Hashanah normally was on the first of those 2 days.
But this is the only
yes,
holiday that starts on the first day on Rosh
absolutely,
Chodesh.
absolutely.
Because-
And that's why Rosh Hashanah has got this quality of being the emblem of this uncertainty base and this human responsibility to figure it out. Now, if I could trouble you to put the sources back on the source sheet back on, we could connect to it.
Rebbetzin, a small question. If the first Rosh Chodesh of Nisan is so important, that mitzvah itself is that mitzvah. It's actually the first mitzvah that we got as a nation. Why don't we celebrate it more?
Why don't we celebrate Rosh? It's very interesting. I think the rabbis were more interested in this question of Rosh Chodesh. How do you make Rosh Chodesh? And less interested in that. But it's a nice question, and I don't really know. That's an interesting question. Why they're not so interested in? Because I think they're not. It's not talking about the beginning of the month. It's talking about Nisan being the beginning, and in many ways it is. And I think maybe you felt it more in the temple, because what it's saying is it's the first of the months. Therefore, Pesach is the first of the holidays. It's more echoed not on the Rosh Chodesh of Nisan, but on the fact that the holidays, Pesach is the first, then Shavuot, and then Sukkot. And the great I suppose because in the case of Rosh Chodesh, of Rosh Hashanah, it says, call this day Yom Teruah. And so we have to live with, well, it's true we started off in Nisan, but in some other way, it's got to be on Rosh Hashanah. But I agree with you, it is surprising. Okay, now let's take a look at this piece here. The piece here is based on a verse in Deuteronomy. Who has got such amazing laws as this people? The other one said, and Choran Amar, and I'm going to read the English. You've got the Hebrew right there. But this is not a text of the Chumash, and therefore, why not read the English? Okay, nice idea, maybe because of the pagan aspect of Rosh Chodesh. Usually in the world, if the ruler says the trial is today, but the robber says tomorrow is the trial, whom does one listen to? Right, nowadays, actually, the defendant can ask to move a trial. But in the world as they knew it, that wasn't the case. And therefore, what they're saying is, normally, let's say you have a case where the ruler says today is the day that you're going to be get judged, and I want to try to move this, hover above it and move this up instead of I can't do it. Okay, never mind. If the says that, then it's the ruler who decides when are you going to be judged, right? It's too bad on you, on the people who want to make the decision. It's the ruler who makes the decision, and that's who we listen to. the ruler. But the Holy One praised him is not like this. If the court said today is New Year's Day, the Holy One, right? What happens? Everybody says it looks like today is going to be Rosh Hashanah. So we're making it today Rosh Hashanah, even though we don't have witnesses yet, but we don't know. So we think it's Rosh Hashanah. The Holy One praised him, says to the angels, put up the dais, summon the defenders and the accusers, for my children said that today is New Year's Day. If the court took counsel to transfer it to the next day, but what happens if they change it? The Holy One praised him, says to the angels, oh, you better remove the dais, remove the defenders, remove the accusers, for my children took counsel to transfer to tomorrow. And there's a wonderful verse, Ki chok l'Yisrael hu mishpat Elohei Yaakov. It is a rule for the Jewish people, mishpat l'Elohei Yaakov. Here, the English is not a good translation. If it's not a rule for Israel, so to speak, it is not a law for the God of Jacob. But no, they're not using the word mishpat there as law. They're using the word mishpat there to signify, it's using it to signify that mishpat means judgment. So what are they saying? That judgment, it's if the Jewish people make it a chok, if they read to say today is Rosh Hashanah, then God judges on that day. And if they say today is not Rosh Hashanah, even if they thought it was going to be Rosh Hashanah, but they changed their minds halfway along because nobody comes in time, then God says, okay, angels, sorry, I was going to make today the day of judgment, but it won't be the day of judgment. Why? Because they didn't see the moon in time. So it's not going to be our day of judgment. Okay, this is almost absurd. I don't know if it's almost absurd or plain old absurd, right? What are we saying here? It's as if God is dependent, right? He can't make it Rosh Hashanah. He can't make it Yom Kippur unless we saw the moon in time and we made it Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Does anybody else besides myself find this really surprising? Certainly the rabbis were saying it's surprising. As they were saying, look what it means, the control of time. It means that you can decide when the holy day is, when the day of Yom Kippur is. Okay. Where's the word? Ki chok l'mishpatei Yisrael. Yes, I would say that the word ki there might mean yes, when.
Well,
Absolutely,
wasn't
because
it
word ki
before
something.
there was a time there was no set calendar. Today there is a set calendar.
Agreed,
So,
but even the
it
set
has to
calendar
be-
that we set it, right?
The
And
point
you can't-
is that the point is that the court is not going to force the judgment on people until people accept that this is the time for judgment. You have to have the cooperation of the defendant to have a case.
Well, I think in the olden times, that wasn't the case. They dragged the defendant into court and it was too bad on him. Today,
But that's not the way the Holy Court works. That's the way a police court works.
That's right. And that's what they're trying to say. The Holy Court works. That's very nice what you're saying. That because we have to choose the time, it's because we have to be ready for it. We are given that opportunity, and not only that opportunity, that's our first mitzvah. Make a situation where you can be in a relationship with God. Make a situation that you will have Rosh Hashanah. Make a situation that you will have Yom Kippur. It's quite unbelievable, really, to say that. And I think it's actually a paradigm for for much of halacha, where we make the decision. But here it's talking about making the decision of creating the situation where, as you say, we will have a judgment because we have decided to come before God. Good. The set calendar is not set according to the astronomical day. Of course not, because you've got quarter days. How do you make it? You can't have it exact because the length of the month, the moon, is actually a piece of a day. So it can never be perfectly exact. It's impossible. It's impossible to set the calendar to an exact natural sense. So we've got a situation where we are making that decision. And the piece here goes on and says more. It says, also, we've rigged the calendar. The Talmud talks about that because we don't want certain things to happen on certain days. all of that is still part of the point that we are in control. We can decide we're going to rig the calendar. We can decide lots of things, but we understand that our first mitzvah was to say, actually, there are mitzvot and there's holiness in time, but sometimes it's going to be you who's going to create what that time is. And therefore, when the holiness will be, and when the possibilities will be, and when the potential will be. Now,
but I remember I'm in Israel more than half a century, and it used to be that Yom Ha'atzmaut happened whenever it was the 5th of Iyar. And then because of Chilul Shabbat, they found that it shouldn't be on a Friday and it shouldn't be on a Sunday. There are certain days, so it could be moved up and moved down.
Correct. And despite that, we say Hallel. Those who people who say Hallel say it, even though they know it's not the exact day. Okay, so that's another example of where you say, we understand that we have been given this obligation, not only opportunity, but obligation to restructure time, basically, to restructure time in terms of times of holiness where there's opportunity and potential for a greater connection, like Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or Pesach, whatever holiday it is that our clock has done. Now, if you continue on the page, we have a number of places where they talk about verses that they read this way. There's a verse, Eila Moadei Hashem, Mikra'ei Kodesh, Asher Tikru Atam. These are the holy days of God, the days that are called holy, that you will call holy. Okay, so in one verse, in Leviticus, you have their holy times, but you're going to call them. Okay, and then we have a wonderful little piece where the rabbis say, I'll give you a mashal, a parable. And they give actually 6 parables for what this is similar to. And what you need to do here is think poetry. You can't be in the world of prose now, okay? Because if you're in the world of prose, you won't be able to taste this properly, okay? So you need to get into the world of poetry and say, what are they talking about? So, Amar Rabbi Levi, and here I shall work from the Hebrew, and you've got the Hebrew and English in front on the page here. Rabbi Levi said, Lemelech shahayalo urlogin. This is, he doesn't say it, this is a parable, or this is similar to a king who has a timepiece. Now, the English wrote watch. That's a terrible translation. There were no watches at that time, okay? I don't know how they got away with that. Kevan she'amad beno misaralo. When his son stood, grew up, Kevan she'amad beno misaralo. He handed that timekeeping piece to him. Now, what was an orlogin and how important was? We're talking about the time of the rabbinic period, the time of the Roman period, Greek and Roman period. There are no hand watches, of course. There are no regular clocks. How do people keep time? Well, there's sundials. There are water clocks called clepsydra. There are things that watch the what's going on in the heavens in terms of, in other words, a timekeeping instrument, it usually very often was a very large thing that you could see, is a major thing. And it's the king who has it. The average person has no timekeeping, no good timekeeping instrument. And there's a famous Tower of the Winds in Athens, which may be what Chazal were referring to. The Tower of the Winds, has anybody seen it in Athens? Well, I went to Athens a few years ago, and I happened to be going to Athens, but one of the main things I was looking forward to seeing was the Tower of the Winds in Athens, which has a weather clock, or a number of them, a few sundials, a weather vane, and it's a big tall tower, and it belongs to the king, but it's something way that everybody can know about time. It's a way of measuring time that everybody knows of, but it belongs to the king. And I wanted to see it, but unfortunately they were just cleaning it or fixing it, or do I know what, and it was completely covered. So I would recommend, though, it's a Really quite an emotional thing. Those of you interested can just look it up, Tower of the Winds. Now, this is what Chazal were talking about. The king has got a good clepsydra or good sundial, all these things. It's the king who has the checking of time, and he hands over this knowledge or these timepieces to his son. It's not that everybody's got a watch or a digital timekeeping on their computer or their phone. It's not something that people know. Understanding how to reckon time is major. And here what it's saying, God with the Jewish people here is like the king who hands that over. Next parable. Lemelach shayalo shomeira, kevan she'amad beno misaralo. A king has a watch box or a watchtower, like you have for the city, or for if you have a fields or you have a vineyard, you have a watchtower. When his son grew up, he handed it to him. Notice the king is still alive. He's not dead. It's not just before he dies, because that wouldn't be a good parallel for God. When his son comes of age, he hands that over to him. Next one, Lemelach sheyalo tabat. A king has a ring with a, how do you say? When you stamp with a stamp on it, right? The ring with an insignia that he stamps. And now notice the parable is different. It's not about watching something and reckoning. It's about making decisions. He has a ring with an insignia. Because this is not just that. It's about the power, because we don't just see the moon. It depends whether we see it in time and whether we say Mekudash, Mekudash in time. And if we do, it's Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Chodesh. And if not, it'll be tomorrow. So here's the insignia. Rabbi Chia says, L'nagar, this is like a carpenter. Notice also the love going on here. It's like a carpenter. When his son comes of age, he hands him the klei nagarut, the carpenter's tools. Here we have not power so much as building, as creating frameworks. A carpenter's making a house, or he's making a bookcase. He's making frameworks. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Lemelach shayalo otzarot. It's like a king with his treasures. When his son comes of age, he hands them over. I find that one surprising in its location, because if I look at all the other ones, there's a movement, which I'm not sure I understand why that one's there. And the last one is maybe the most magnificent, Le Rofei. It's similar to a doctor. Shehayalo nartik shel rufuot. He has a bag with rufuot, with medicines. Kevan shabad b'no misaralo. When his son comes of age, he takes that kit and gives the medicines to his son. Notice what we've moved from time to something else. Our ability to do this, to make decisions, to change the structures of possibilities of coming close to God, suddenly is becoming something incredibly creative. Can I trouble you, Shira, to remove the source sheet so we can all see each other? What's happened here? We've moved away from the paradigm of time into other kinds of realms. We started with, this is about a king who has control of the timekeeping pieces. Maybe it's a tower, maybe it's a sundial, maybe it's a water clock, and he gives that to his son. So his son is the one who can reckon time now, who can make decisions. And then we moved on to the one who's got the actual insignia. He not only can watch for things, but he's got the insignia, he can make the decisions. But then we moved on to carpentry. That being able to decide when is Rosh Hashanah, when is Rosh Chodesh, and when is going to be Pesach, that's like carpentry. And then we move on to being able to be given that possibility. It's not only carpentry, it's not only structural, it's actually being given medical knowledge. It's being given the knowledge to heal. That
Power of life.
Yes. Oh, nice. There's a knowledge to heal that we're being given, that God is saying to us at the beginning. Remember, this is the first mitzvah. The first mitzvah. They're saying, what is this first mitzvah like? It's empowering you to understand that your life has to be one in which you use these powers, which starts with a business of construction in terms of time, but moves on to a broader sense of what mitzvot can do, or a broader sense of what time and living in time. You're no longer living within time, but you're structuring how your time is going to be. And you're structuring in terms of, you're seeing yourself as a carpenter, you're seeing yourself as somebody with healing powers, as a tremendous movement. All this about that first mitzvah that said, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim, which Chazal understood as not only being about Nisan, but being about how the decision as to whether today will be Rosh Hashanah hangs in the balance. God created nature, but he left it to you. Did you see it in time? Were you able to say, yes, we've seen it, it's holy today, or were you not able to do it, in which case it will be tomorrow? And that's okay. It's not the wrong day. That's what's so fascinating. It's the day that it should be. Because yes, Hashem is giving us responsibility. How we keep halacha is going to be based on some kind of dance between mitzvot that God gives us and our understandings of them. Where is this passage from? It's from the Jerusalem Talmud Yerushalmi, the first chapter, halacha 3, the third Mishnah. Okay, it's from the Talmud created in Eretz Yisrael on the Masechet of Rosh Hashanah. And I think it's coming to open up the possibilities of what it means to relate to time. That time is not only something that we're stuck in and we're part of, but that it's actually something that we look at and say, how are we creative? And how are we healing in terms of how we look at time? So maybe you can mull over this for next week, and we can open next week with some ideas of where you got to with this piece, because I think the piece is just such a magnificent piece, a poetic piece. And we'll move on to 2 pieces next week, which talk about the radical movement of past and future, and the ability to really, through one's narrative or through one's hard work, to actually flip past and future. Okay, in the rabbinic perspective. Okay, so thank you very much for joining today, and I look forward to next week.
Excuse me, the third page? Third page in Rosh Hashanah?
No, the third Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah in the Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud. So it's the commentary in the Jerusalem Talmud on the third Mishnah. Right?
Thank you.
And it's just so magnificent. Right, a pleasure, real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you next week in Mitzvah Hashem. Have a wonderful Shabbat, and please mull it over, and let's see where we get to for next week.
Thank you so much.
Have a great week, everybody.